Well, welcome to my next edition of the Tattoo Teacher podcast. Joining me this evening, this morning, or wherever you are listening in your time zone from, I have Al Kingsley. Now, if you haven't heard of Al, you probably need to get out a little bit more. I want to get to some conversation, but the brief bio that I've got will just shed some light on what this man has done over the last 30 plus years. So he is a EdTech expert. Now, an expert is thrown around a lot, but once we hear what Al has done, it's going to be amazing. So he is the group CEO of Net Support Limited. He's an EdTech advisor, mentor, author, and speaker. He's on the advisory board as a member for the Regional Directorate of East England. He's a chair of the Board of Trustees of the Hampton Academies Trust. Export champion for the Department of Business and Trade, author of several books, and like I said, far too many more to mention if we actually want to get to our conversation. So Al, welcome to the Tattoo Teacher podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Phil. Lovely to be here.
Yeah, I tried to distill down your bio, but it just kept on getting bigger and bigger and bigger. You certainly have done a lot in your professional career.
I think as time has gone on, I think like many of us discover, you start off in your professional career and you reach a point where you think you know most things. And then you get as a bit older and wiser, you realize that actually there's more to learn than there is that you've already learned. And I also think there's a theme across many of the different hats I wear. They're all fundamentally linked around education and digital and how that can be linked into the broader conversation. Sometimes because I try and get involved on a regional and a national level when it comes to things like skills. We want to be in a better place in our countries, but often we have to start much earlier in age and stage and how we set things up in systems. So I guess I'm very fortunate. I'm in a place where I get to talk a lot about what I've heard, what I've learned, what I think, and a few people are daft enough to listen. So it's a win-win all around, Phil.
So you like you said, you get around, you talk, you travel extensively with speaking engagements. But for someone to do that for such an extended period of time, you've got to have a passion for it or a drive for it. So what's your why behind it?
My why behind it is because the more I travel, the more I work with schools, academy trusts, school districts, wherever I am in the world within the context of education and digital, I can continue to see the divide, the sense of not the equity that exists within our education system. For many years, it's kind of been very much focused around place and space and the inequity that exists. And you often look and think the locales shouldn't influence the opportunities that our children have. And at the same time, I always think that no matter what we do and we talk about it, there's too much rigidity higher up in our political systems, in our governmental systems, where our focus is always on what can we tinker with and do now that we're going to be able to show some kind of benefit from within the electoral cycle, rather than looking at the long-term picture of we actually need to start from the early years setting and actually preschool in terms of the support and nurture we offer to youngsters right the way through to then recognizing topics I know you've discussed on previous episodes already, about recognizing that what we want to allow our children to acquire in terms of their broader skills as well as their knowledge acquisition is an ever-changing target with the workplace and the landscape, and one where I don't think policymakers are recognizing. So the driver for me is whenever I see something where I think those children aren't getting a fair opportunity, where there's inequity in a system, I try to look at who's influencing that region or that system and how can I share a voice, provide a bit of pressure, provide a bit of amplification of what's happening to try, not always successfully, but to try and help move the conversation forward.
Yeah, that must be a tough ask. I mean, I know being in Australia, I know currently in England, it was just recently announced that I think if the Labor government get back in, they're applying a 20% tax to all private tuition. And so it's just like, here's another another football to be kicked around for a 4-year term, and I find, I mean, it's probably very similar around the globe, especially in westernized countries, that education has become the political football to try and make someone stay elected for 4 years, and then, well, they make the promises, but I've seen too many things fall through, too many cracks over the years.
It's not for the benefit of the young people in our education system. Most of the time when we look at the difference between when we have different education systems running in parallel, you always seem to at some point end up with a political conversation that results in leveling down. It's about, there's too many opportunities, there's too much funding there, therefore we need to try and find a way to move from there downwards. The recognition is the same we see whether it's charter schools and public schools in the US. We have those same challenges, rather than recognizing that actually a system should be always about how do we level up, never about how do we restrict or limit where we have high performance. There's also, like all things, we often talk about things in isolation, but the education ecosystem has a finite capacity. It's a finite capacity of learners, irrespective of what status school they are learning in. And we have a finite capacity of educators. And yet sometimes when we talk big picture, we have this sense that there's a magic pool of teachers that will just appear to fill any strategic ideas we come up with. And of course, we all know what happens is we just put greater and greater expectation on the same pool, and we actually accelerate that exodus where people say this is not the right role for me because it's impacting on my work-life balance to the point where I can't sustain. And I think that's always the case where we often talk in education that the most important thing we do, and many of the things we want to move forward, is about the fundamentals of co-production, that all stakeholders have got a voice. So we're not just talking about the what we're doing and when we're doing it, but we're really focusing on the why we're doing it. And in education, you have to think of this as a complete ecosystem. And unfortunately, you can't do that in an electoral cycle. So what always happens is well-intentioned leaders tinker at the edges. And those small changes create significant disruption within the education system. And often the cost is far greater than the intended benefit from it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree. I couldn't agree more. And I find it interesting, and you've probably had many conversations with some of the people who make some of these decisions, that they were often very well educated in some of the best schools with the best facilities. They had access to wealth that often others don't, and yet they seem to dismiss some of the schools, and like you're saying, instead of leveling up, they seem to try and level down. Is that the case with some of the conversations you've had with some of these key players?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's a continued one, and there are some really good people trying to continue the conversation. And the reason why I wear different hats, from chairing a multi-academy trust to an alternative provision, looking after some of the most vulnerable learners, to doing apprenticeship ambassador in the region and skills, is because they are all fundamentally linked. And there has to be continuous challenge. We can't always look at if we change the measure of something, or if we change something very subtly in the curriculum, that will fix the problem. The problem, if we want to define it, starts right at the very beginning, which is, what are we trying to achieve? What is our purpose and our measure of good and amazing schools and an education system? And I did co-chairing a work stream with the OECD, who, as you know, will come out each year with our PISA rankings, and we look at our high-performing school systems around the world. Well,
they got a bashing this year, didn't they?
Well, yeah, but high-performing in what sense? We look at 15-year-olds and we measure, their curriculum acquisition, their knowledge attained across some core pillars of subjects, the core foundations and STEM subjects. And we say, based on that, we can say that Singapore and Finland and other countries are here and other countries are down. Well, I'm not dismissing the need for acquisition of knowledge and facts, but what I'm also really mindful of is that I don't want to be leading a school cluster, a multi-academy trust here in the UK, where our priority is how many children are taught to the test. I want a school system that says how many children leave the school with a love of learning and a love of themselves. And to do that, something that the OECD and this workstream was focused around was their new measures looking at an education system that promotes human flourishing. And that context that we think about skills, those cognitive skills, critical thinking skills, we think about resilience, we think of creativity. One of the phrases that I always like to try and share is, how do we have a school system, an education system that promotes learners to develop a sense of awe and wonder? Appreciations of the arts, of music, of just beautiful landscapes, settings, relationships. And that can all sound a little bit woolly, but what it fundamentally comes back to, in my eyes, is rather than being very restrictive, we have to look at the breadth of the curriculum we offer so that there's a place and a space for every learner based on their skills, their way of learning, allowing every child to be successful down a stream and not looking at some subjects as being lesser, some subjects as not being relevant, because actually maybe doctors and a few other specialist roles besides, when we leave school and we go into the outside world, employers are looking at those core power skills, as I call them now, rather than soft skills, but they're looking at those communication skills and critical thinking skills and resilience and people's ability to innovate and come up with fresh ideas as much as they are those other foundational ones. And you've talked and you shared loads of resources when we think about how technology is shifting the landscape, both in the workplace and in education. The skill sets of human being 2.0 in 10 years from now is going to have quite a different weighting to human being 1.0 from, I can say from 150 years ago, because that really reflects the foundational space of how our education systems are currently structured. So who starts that conversation? Often we say, well, educators need to take more of a lead. Well, you know what? The first thing is, where's the capacity? People are firefighting. People are trying to deal with the social emotional pressures for our learners, the capacity of delivering a curriculum that in reality there's not enough hours in the day to actually deliver on to the full intent. Also at the moment trying to upskill and deliver digital skills, digital citizenship, wrap around in terms of that space. And secondly, how long do you have to keep saying this isn't working, there's too much pressure, there's too much of an expectation, to think nobody's listening, so why am I going to keep saying it? Because actually we don't have systems that allow for that co-production back from educators up to government to say this isn't working. It's too politically sensitive, it's too big a picture conversation. So I think it becomes incumbent on all of us as we get to a place in a space where we're invited to the table at different levels within the education system to have the courage of our convictions, to not always just say, well, it's lovely to be here and thank you for your efforts, but to say, hang on a minute, I don't agree. You're not listening. You're not recognizing that there's a storm coming. But more importantly, all the time we're talking about this, there are young people working through our education system that aren't getting the fullest of opportunities. That's not good enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And coming from the coalface, I'm a full-time high school teacher. And I've been doing it for a little over 20 years now. I've seen some great changes, but I've seen some absolutely detrimental changes in the way the expectations that are consistently placed upon teachers. It's just do this, it's just do that. And I was just sharing, a friend of mine just shared a post the other day on Facebook, and she's gone, I've just become a statistic. And she went on and listed everything, and she has walked out of an industry that she thought she'd retire in after 4 years. And, she had so much to offer. She came from a background of journalism. She speaks, she taught Japanese. She was well traveled. So she brought this breadth of experience to the classroom, and the kids thrived. And she actually loved being with the kids, but the system chewed her up. And you're just seeing that we're seeing that more and more. And so, like you're saying, to be invited to the table, I think teachers are at that point where they won't go, yeah, thanks, yeah, appreciate being here. They're just going to go, you guys are rubbish. You got to pick up your game. You're destroying a beautiful system to help encourage and grow and just challenge these young minds, because kids want to learn. Kids want to. They will rise or lower to meet the expectations that are placed in the classroom. And
I think what you can do though, Phil, I mean, one of the things that I recognize is, going from from the coalface to political change in an education system, we're all realists. There's a lot of steps along the way, and it's
Yeah.
impossible to influence directly. So where we have changes in structures, so here in the UK, we have our education system where we have a multi-academy trust, so clusters of schools that are all operated by a single entity that then reports back into the Department for Education. Part of the charge, for want of a better term, and focusing on these positives is the controls and opportunities there are with confident leadership within our academies to say, we're going to influence change within our cluster of schools. We're going to be robust in the challenge if that doesn't meet the standard guidelines, but we're going to do things in a way that we think is most important. So we're going to look and say, where we know the natural is we're going to be compared to everybody else on a league table. We're going to choose to take a hit on that in return for having a broader set of curriculum offers for some of our learners. When we go post-16, we're going to make the threshold to allow our learners to stay in our schools and join our post-16 provision. We're going to make it easier for them to continue because we want to give them opportunities, even if statistically that means we won't have the highest outcomes when it comes to our A-level results and our university entries. We're going to look and say, how can we connect our schools and share our provision so that we can offer that curriculum that's both the pure academic but vocational, and we can also share those resources. We're going to look at in our trust case, we have an infant school, the youngest of children, and we're going to say, look, there is a framework to follow. We absolutely support the learning through play and activities, but we're going to introduce our children to the opportunities, particularly if they're, in our case, from a deprived area, to access resources in a different way to stimulate that love of learning. And so we look and we have, in our case, it's always relevant for a topic we're having on tech and the landscape and all the things that are happening. We have a converted school coach, and inside there we have children that are 4, 5, 6-year-olds that are wearing VR headsets, using tablets with augmented reality, stimulating experiences they wouldn't have encountered to sharp conversation, vocabulary acquisition, just stimulating an engagement. We took a decision to take our primary and secondary phase schools and to create all through provision so that when we get that transition for learners into big school, we don't get those lost couple of terms where they're struggling with acquisition and the change in the way that they're taught. So we create nurture groups. So some young people don't go into the big school experience, although they're in the building. They continue to be in one classroom and gradually get extended out to the broader school community. And for our learners that are on a different pathway, we look and say, well, can technology help? And where it can help, we might say, well, some of our students are going to be introduced to Shakespeare and their first piece of work to start reading and understanding. And some of our learners are going to be building the Globe Theatre in Minecraft, and they're going to be talking about the topic, and they're going to start to acquire confidence talking around the topic, but they're going to be doing it at a pace in a way that engages with them and builds their confidence. And all these things are about, that doesn't require national mandate. That doesn't require anything from the government. It requires strong leadership to say, we need to put confidence in our teachers to adapt what they do depending on the needs of the students and be more supportive of that rather than trying to always think about what's the outcome and the measure at the end of it.
That sounds amazing. And it sounds that the primary focus is on the learner.
Absolutely.
Everything is like, we'll remove the teacher from the equation, we'll remove the curriculum from the equation, but we'll bring the student into focus so that they can achieve the best form of success for them.
That's the aim. I mean, obviously we have restrictions in the sense of we have a curriculum that we have to follow, but we all know there's different paces and ways to acquire the curriculum, and there's different ways. We've talked for a good few years around things like assistive technologies and how that can support our children with special educational needs and disabilities. But what we're also seeing is there's different ways for disconnected learners or learners that get dysregulated easily in the classroom to find different ways that they can access information in the learning space. Now, it's by no means a case of there's a problem, there's a solution, because it's not a solution. It's a step towards a solution, because the limiting factor is always capacity of teaching staff, of teaching assistants and support staff, capacity in terms of time when you're trying to wrap around that, the ever-increasing need we have in our schools for social emotional health. And at the same time, we've also got a pressure in many schools around the world, and we're seeing it definitely in the UK, which is actually just getting children across the threshold into school. getting them to actually attend school. And that's been amplified post-pandemic by both learners really struggling and with anxiety and other challenges when it comes to being in the structure of a school that's not necessarily adaptable to every child's needs, and to parents that both in some cases have disconnected with the value of the learning opportunities a child gets at school, but also with the new hybrid landscape, feeling it's much easier to keep their child at home if the child is struggling. And so finding ways to say, well, this isn't just about breadth and learner driven, but this is also how do we as a system start to think about how do we make the place of school the right place for support and nurture for every type of student. And that's really challenging because there isn't, in our case, in most regions in the UK, there isn't sufficient specialist provision for learners with complex needs. There isn't specific alternative provision for learners behaviourally who struggle in mainstream education, where normally they would go to an alternative provision, get the support, wraparound nurture they need, get resources via an educational psychologist to help them, and then have a managed placement back into the mainstream of education. So many of these drivers are, we've got a strategy, but we haven't got the capacity or the resources within the system to fully implement against it.
Yeah, it's a massive challenge to try and to fit all that in, and I've seen that the hybrid landscape is growing. I think, and like you said, parents are saying, well, what's the point of sending my child to school when there's platforms, there's opportunities where they can stay at home, they can be safe, they actually engage. So what's the point of sending them to school where they just, get lost
There's
in
a ripple
the
effect.
crowd?
There's a ripple effect, Phil, which I think is one of the biggest challenges and something why I'm so passionate about highlighting great practice and what people are doing through the system, is that as parents or a subset of parents disconnect with the real benefit and value of education, and we've got another subset of parents that diplomatically have almost delegated all responsibility to education for their child's needs and developmental process. And we've got government being quite negative in talking about education and outcomes and schools need to do more. What we do is we gradually have propagated a lack of respect for the education profession and those people that work within it. And I think that is something that's changed over the last 10 years to our detriment, because by losing that, it creates more pressure on educators. It makes the job harder. And I think it discourages more people from coming into the profession. Now, maybe I'm just an old guy that remembers the good times when people had a lot of respect for the local police officer on the corner of the street and for our teachers. But when we think about the breadth of responsibilities that we're putting on our most precious commodity in our country, our future workforce, our future population, we put all that responsibility on there, and then yet you pick up the news and most of the conversation is negative about the space, the system, the people within it. And it's just so unjustified that I think there's another focus, which is we kind of need to shine a light on all the good stuff that's happening in spite of the pressures and the capacity and the challenge. And in my role with the Department for Education, supporting academies across our region, I think it's fair to say whenever I go into a trust that's struggling, maybe it's leadership, maybe it's finance, maybe there's other factors at play, you will always discover some of the most amazing pockets of innovation and nurture and opportunities that are happening within the school. Sometimes that's where the best stuff's happening, because you're really having to make the most out of that human capital. What can I do as a person with these young people? Because I don't have the luxury of this huge toolkit of resources that I can play to. And that's something that really you have to hold up and say, look, some of the best teaching and learning, much as I love my EdTech and I love it when it's used for purpose and with impact, some of the best teaching doesn't involve a jot of technology. It's just the brilliance of that connection when you see between educators that are lighting a fire in the children and that passion for wanting to discover more.
Yeah, that was perfectly put, and in the sense that it's the relationship between the educator and the student. I know in my classrooms, I can't get an inch of teaching done until I have a relationship with these students, until they have and they don't have to like me, but they know where the lines are. They know what's fair, what's just, what's right, what's wrong. But they also know that I will listen to them. And and we all just want to be heard as well. But especially in the formative years, if they're shut down quite often, and if it's at that perfectly incorrect time, that will just shut them down for the rest of their lives. And so I will, and I have, and I will continue to do it. I've blown out 45 minute hour lessons because a child has asked a question that was important to them, had nothing to do with what we're studying, but it was important to them, and I could sense that they weren't just trying to waste time. They really wanted an answer, and so we went down that pathway, and then all of a sudden, Bill from over here and Sally from over here, and all of a sudden the whole classroom is engaged in this conversation about what they are going through, and then you come back to the next lesson, and they just want to learn. They want to listen to you because you've listened to them. So
Yeah.
and
Yeah, I mean, the human bit is fundamental, isn't it? It's really at the heart of everything we do, and it's interesting because you'll know from many of the resources I share. I spend a lot of time talking with schools, school systems, and the broader community around the role of digital as a lever when it comes to change in our schools. Increasingly, with conversations about how infrastructure and digital can empower system growth. We see consolidations of schools into multi-academy trusts. We see international schools getting more and more members that come together. How does technology empower and support? And people think that the end conversation is always about, well, with all these tools, you've got all these magic things that you can do. But actually, the ultimate aim is about how do we free up time for the human to human bit. It's not about how do we replace. It's all about these are tools to support, and the best tools, the best technology, the best anything that we use in a school is something that we don't have to talk about every day. It's just there to be drawn on by the professional at the right time within the classroom. And I think it's easy if you don't follow the whole conversation through to think, and I hear many educators talk about how technology is there to replace teachers. And it's really not the case, but it's that sense, I think, of whenever there's change, there's always when I do a digital strategy inset day with staff, half the room will start with this is exciting, this is an opportunity, finally we get to be innovative, we need to do cool things, and the other half of the room go, oh no, I haven't got the capacity, I haven't got the skills, it's not my area of expertise, what do I do? And it's understanding that, these aren't things that need to be, both rushed or scary. This is about how do we effectively communicate a purpose and how this can support us doing the really important things. When we connected just before this chat, you said, you'd like to have those kind of conversational styles like we're in a coffee shop. I took an approach when I wrote my first book on EdTech. I called it My Secret EdTech Diary. Not quite Adrian Mole, age 13 3/4. But the intent was, I'm not going to write a book to tell you how smart I am or how much I know about technology. I'm going to write a book that is accessible, that is lighthearted, that talks about, perhaps in some cases, complicated things, but in an easy way. And you'll see when I share resources, it often has me and my cockapoo dog Ferdy, who's my wingman for well-being wherever I go. And it's not just that I like creating cool imagery and pictures. It's about actually making things accessible. It's about simplifying things. And I do think at times we end up getting so overwhelmed by all the opportunities and choice, whether it's technology or our school system, that we lose focus on the small stepping stones that we can actually influence and do ourselves. And so, all those strands, I think, come back to, we can't change the national landscape. We can keep talking. Some of us can keep trying to push and put pressure, but we can work back to the boundary that's within our sphere of influence. And then within that space, we can start to build what do we want to do based on our priorities. And our priorities will give us hopefully the confidence where appropriate to deviate, or where we think it's appropriate to innovate, or where it's appropriate in some schools to say, you know what, there's so much pressure on us right now. We're so focused on our learners' well-being, that actually we're going to pause for a year and we'll continue on our digital journey or our growth journey as a cluster of schools in a year's time. Right now, it's okay to consolidate, just catch our breaths, build confidence in what we already do, get evidence of impact, and that will give us a much stronger foundation to think about what's the next step for us.
That's really refreshing to hear as an educator, because I mean you've probably heard the conversations, especially being in the EdTech sphere, that there are teachers who have just been beat up by EdTech, by
Yep.
companies going, buy my latest shiny whatever. It'll revolutionise your world. It'll make whatever their sales pitch is, and so the school goes, okay, we'll give it a go, and then all of a sudden teachers are going, okay, well we've got to learn this thing. Then it doesn't actually pan out. Then the company goes bankrupt and then all of a sudden you're left with teachers who are feeling like, hold on, I got stung again.
Yeah.
So to hear you with
Nobody
your
wins there, Phil.
no,
That's a no-win for the industry, for education, for people's confidence, and so on. I mean, whenever I do my presentations, and there's quite a few that I share online about digital strategy, one of the key slides I will show is less is more unless it's chocolate. It is not a race to who's got the most tech, and I'm, again, keep it simple, stupid. Philosophy of life is actually you're much better to introduce one thing where you've been really clear on the what, the how, but also the why. Build confidence in how to use that tool, capture the evidence of impact, and then everybody's on board for what's next. We all understand the next building block and we've got confidence in what we've got. Chuck 4 or 5 new tools into the mix at the beginning, and why would you expect success? We always say, the educator's cup is full. You've got to tip something out before you tip something new in. And typically professional development, we talk about the need for professional development. We talk within our trust and within our school systems about, having support for teacher professional development. But nobody actually says, brackets, we mean podcasts, YouTube and newsletters in your own time at the weekend and in the evenings. Well, that's not going to win the race. That's just going to grind people down. What people want is, how do I do it and interweave that within my role? How is my school, my cluster of schools, helping everybody acquire confidence in these tools? How are we signposting who the experts are within the school system to provide support? How did you do that? I'm struggling with this. How do you help me? How do we change the mindset that there's a critique if you hold your hand up and say, you know what, I'm really struggling with how to use OneNote? Often we kind of almost have this sense that nobody wants to put their hand above the parapet and say, you know what, I'm really struggling with the role of technology. Well, that's cool. You could be an amazing teacher. If you're struggling with technology, you need to understand how it may or may not benefit your role within the classroom, your students, and it's on the school system to figure out how to do that. And the best example I give is I'll often walk into a cluster of schools and I'll say, can you tell me who are the linguists and the MFL specialists, modern foreign language specialists? And of course, there's a trust guide, phone book of all the schools, and we know these are all the French teachers, the German teachers, and so on. And if I say the same question then and say, so who are the OneNote specialists? Who are the quizzes specialists? Who are the whatever? There's a pause. Well, if staff don't know who are the go-to people, how do you build confidence to reach out of your comfort zone and try stuff? You can make it easier by saying, actually, if you're dealing with this, if you've got any questions, Phil's your man, or Fred's your man, or Anna's your girl. It doesn't matter. But that signposting of building confidence. And then the second thing is the clock. That hidden clock that's tick, tick, ticking with your capacity, your time and pressure that we put onto people. So within our trust, our digital strategy, one of the things I refuse to have is a time and date on anything. Why set the sword of Damocles over everyone's heads to say by this period, we will all have acquired knowledge and skills and capacity and have done this, when we know full well that 3 weeks later, there will be some completely unrelated pressure or challenge that's far more important on our learners' needs. And the last thing we want to do is create that sense of expectation that if you haven't got to here by this date, you fail. Now, increasingly, we've got amazing people, many that you've joined and included in that your good self, that are sharing the kind of, here are the stepping stones. This is how you can build confidence. Here are some of the things that might help you on your journey. But I think we also need to be incumbent that most schools tend to be pre-programmed to be quite inward-looking. We've got a particular challenge, we've got a particular need. Who on the teaching staff should lead on that, and who else might we lean into? And part of that's then resetting the clock that says actually you need to be more outward-looking. You need to rely on your PLN far more in terms of looking for best practice and ways to do things on a step-by-step basis. And that builds confidence. And again, that feeds, I guess, into what I try and share every weekend, which is, look, there's loads of people sharing these great things that will give you confidence to get started or give you confidence to move to the next level. You're not alone. And the not alone bit is probably the most important one, is people sometimes apologize to me. I'm sorry, this really isn't my space, or I really haven't got to this point. There's no apology. Actually, the most reassuring thing, I think, when it comes to anything across the education space, but it applies to all other sectors as well, is it's okay. You're not alone. Lots of people are just like you. You just didn't know that. You're assuming that somehow by you not doing this, you're falling behind or you're letting the side down, whereas actually you're not. You're the majority. The majority are struggling, saying, I don't have time and capacity to do this. And so that sense of just signposting you're not alone, I think, is also really, really important in terms of all of our professional journeys.
Yeah, the feeling of being siloed is so real in every school that I've worked in. I
Yep.
mean, it comes down to, well, there's departments here. There's the English, languages department. There's the design department. There's the art department. So immediately we're siloed, and then so you're working in there, and then you are just like, oh, geez, I don't know, but and so you build up, and they're so we have that own self confidence, and we want to be seen as that we have a handle on everything. And I know that maybe I'm just built differently to some, that I'm willing to go, I don't know that can, if it's going to help a job, can you give me a hand? And in turn, if I know something, I'm going to, if this helps you, here's as many resources as I've got. Like I'll give away, subject outlines. I'll give away resources because I know that in the past that's been done for me, and it's helped me tremendously. It's probably one of the things that has kept me in education, finding those people to go, yeah,
Absolutely.
you're not alone. Here's some help.
We all stand on the shoulders of others somewhere along the line in our professional journey and in our personal journeys in many regards. And I think that is fundamental, is how do we provide that kind of that support network, but that opportunity to actually give people the confidence to say, this is where I need help when it comes to my development. I draw a parallel. 5-10 years ago, and maybe in some cases it's still the case, people would not feel comfortable talking about their mental health. They would see it as somehow there would be some judgment applied to their capacity to cope, whether it was in career progression or whatever. And thankfully, we're in a place and a space now where people can be much more open about, in many cases, how they're feeling. And I personally think that actually shows a real strength in terms of, education's built on reflective practice. So for me, people who can identify they need help and support, whether it's on pressure and capacity of what they're doing in their job, or whether it's on their skills development, whether it's digital or whatever, is far more powerful than somebody who says, you know what, I think I'm the finished article, because that doesn't exist. And I think, what we have to do is make a system that isn't judgmental about that. So, for example, what we would do is we would do a survey of all of our staff, talking about skills levels and confidence with tools and other activities. But we wouldn't do them all with a give us your name and department. Some are anonymized so people feel confident, and we use that as the litmus test of where we might focus some professional development at inset days throughout the year, as well as how we might signpost on an ongoing basis where we've got resources. Ironically, during the pandemic, teachers were brilliant at finding that hybrid, that flip to support our learners, and how they were putting exemplars, little recordings for students to access to continue their learning. And then you come back and say, okay, we're all adults in the building here. When you did that training, did you record any of that for any of the other staff? Nope, didn't think so. Didn't think to do that. Okay, we've just had some new interactive boards delivered in one of our schools, and they came in to do training. Did you invite any of the staff from the other schools in our group? Did you record that training session? Nope. Well, what about the staff down the hall who got one of the same boards from last year, but they only joined us 3 weeks ago at the start of term? We miss opportunities to signpost just by thinking about how we can change our practice to be more switched on to this I'm doing now is something I could share. Let me take the opportunity to capture it and put that out there for others. And actually, that subtle change of mindset and practice within a school can be quite powerful in terms of that very beginning conversation we've had, Phil. There's loads of amazing stuff happening in a school, but people don't know it's there, or they're doing stuff and they don't realize themselves what they're doing is really powerful and innovative and something that others would value from. So, it's creating that show and tell culture. It's almost like having the regular teach meets, either in person or in a shared Teams folder or wherever it is, putting those places where people can access it and consume it at a time that works for them.
Yeah, it's critical that teachers that teachers share, but often we, like you said, oh no, I didn't even think about it, and I think that comes back to our cup is so full that we've got the okay, I've got to learn how to do this, so that's what I've got to think about now. So and it's not that they're being dismissive of anyone else or they're being just selfish and they want to hold that information. It's just like I actually didn't even think it didn't even come into my mind because I'm so full up I can't
Yeah.
even get past it. So it's a daily challenge, I think, that all educators and probably educational systems go through, that they teachers want to do the best by their colleagues and by their students, and no one goes in to go, yeah, well, I'm going to have a bad day and I'm going to hold this information to myself.
Yeah.
So
But that's the joy of digital. We're seeing more and more that learning network, that sharing of resources opening up, uh, and it has to, because much like everywhere else in the world, we're seeing a rapid change in the tools available as well as the challenges our learners are facing, and so you have to find ways to adapt. And sometimes people get negative about that adaptability because it's presented in the sense of everything's got to change. The best way to move forward is to kind of throw everything away and start again in the way that we deliver education. There's huge amounts that's fantastic and good about our education system, and there's stuff that is stifling and in need of change.
yeah,
And that bit isn't some kind of layer of rocket science. It's stuff people at the coalface have been saying for years. We'd like to be able to broaden our curriculum. We'd like to do more of these things, but we need capacity. We need to change what is deemed to be the acceptable measure. Sometimes we're all forced to hang our performance in our schools, certainly in my area, around measures of progress. But that progress measure is a bit of a strange one because it starts at an early stage in our primary schools, and some of it's internally assessed by teachers, and sometimes then it's done by externally. And then our secondary schools take that starting thing and they're measured on progress from that. But we don't have confidence in the starting measure we're measured on progress on, and we recognise it's not nuanced enough for all of our different learner cohort to really recognise that there's other measures, there's other things we could be looking at that would be far more impactful on the long term of that child. So, I think it's a case of, let's not go for the throw it out and start again. Let's just think about the incremental changes that we have influence over within our schools, and at the same time try and get to a point in each of our countries around the world where hopefully there's sufficient strength of leadership at a political level that somebody will recognise that actually decisions about education shouldn't be a political discussion at all. They're about getting consensus from all political voices about putting a framework in place to allow the education system to adapt and evolve in the coming 15, 20, 25 years. And that's the more realistic approach. Empower the people that are already doing it to make the right shifts and the right change.
yeah, and they have to be incremental. They have to be the 1% changes over
Absolutely.
time, because I think the system is too large. If it was to be, smash it down and try and rebuild it, it would be absolute chaos, and it would be to no one's benefit. And yes, education needs to change. There's so many good things about the educational system that need to be enhanced, but there is a lot that needs to go. Maybe we need to just dial that back a bit. Let's remove that. I know that over time, just the administrative burden that teachers are placed upon takes away the joy of teaching. It takes away what they wanted to do and takes their energy away. And
That's a
by
really important point. Sorry, Phil. I was going to say that's a really important point because one of the things that I try and focus on is, particularly with this ever increasingly digital conversation, that there's more technology outside of the classroom than in the classroom if you take the whole school structure as its entirety. And actually, much of the things we should be doing are about optimizing the efficiencies in that broader digital ecosystem so that we free up both time and hopefully resources for that bit in the classroom that's really, really important. And so the reason why I just kind of tag on that is in order to make that impact of time and capacity for the human bit in the classroom, sometimes the direction of those incremental changes isn't immediately to dive into the classroom and say we need to change this. It's actually to change the system surrounding it to make sure that it is optimized to support what's happening. Just think slightly bigger as a starter.
Yeah. So speaking of optimization, do you think that, I mean, the big conversation in education over the last, since November of 2022, has been generative AI. Now, we know AI has been around for a long time, machine learning and all that has been around for a very long time. But in its current iteration, do you think that generative AI has the opportunity to be the tool that helps give back some of that time for teachers?
It has the potential. It's certainly not the panacea to anything. I think we've seen a journey where we first started off with schools looking and starting to develop the narrative to understand that separation between generative and non-generative AI. And there are quite a lot of personalized learning pathway tools, management information systems that are already and had been using non-generative AI for data analysis or for progress for learners on curated questions to develop their subject knowledge or step them back foundationally. With generative AI, there's a natural thing when we look about we're introducing something, how do we measure impact for us to be drawn back to that progress and attainment are our measures of success in our school. Whereas I think right now, many of us are saying if we look on our risk register of priorities in our schools, it's on student and staff well-being, it's on recruitment and retention, it's on financial operational efficiencies, and then we get onto some of those other bits. So within that context, I think generative AI absolutely has the potential to focus on where we want to reduce staff workload, whether it's about that element for helping curate some of the draft lesson planning, resources, content. There absolutely are some great leadership tools I'm seeing coming out that are really ring-fenced around resources specifically for policy creation, timetabling, letter creations, lots of the administrative resources that, again, free up time. And then alongside that, we're starting to see really good conversations from educators who are starting to talk about how we can take the benefits or potential benefits of generative AI from supporting teacher workload into how that might be used to develop and innovate teaching and learning. And you're starting to see some examples, but I think that's where the mindset of we need to change the boundaries of what we consider particularly our formative, but maybe also a summative assessment in terms of if we're introducing children to using AI tools for a particular purpose, for create this, now use our agreed AI tool or bot to develop how you might stretch your knowledge further or how you might frame something differently. So certainly in our schools, 90% of the schools here, the conversation is around prompt engineering, effective use of whether you're a co-pilot in your Office 365 schools or whether you're using Gemini. Some are kind of taking the view of whether it's Perplexity or Claude, which you can have within Perplexity for different purposes and analysis of documents. And I think, which is healthy, we're starting to see some much more education-specific ring-fenced apps that have got very transparent and defined data sources, which I think is always really, really helpful. So I think, yes, absolutely. I do have a little alarm bell, which is every country I go to and I see government policy when it comes to the curation of policy around the use of AI, which is always chasing the tail of what's happening. I keep seeing on the policy committees, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and others, and I can't help feeling they're the wrong people to be in the room. We've got the fox guarding the chickens.
Yeah, that's a big thing, isn't it? Like yeah, you probably saw my face.
Yeah,
Then
yeah.
it's just like, yeah, that's frightening to see that. And look, maybe they have good intentions, but
I
you
think they
think,
do, but they don't have all the intentions. And I
no,
think what we're seeing is, you know, whenever we talk about technology, you know, within our schools, we will, for any solution within the EdTech arena, we would do some form of data protection impact assessment. We want to know what this technology is, where does it store our student data, who has access to it, for how long, and what are the risks if that was to be breached or shared. I think the AI conversation has exaggerated that sense of what are the risks alongside what are the opportunities. So we understand that we can't take the output as given. We still have concerns whether it's about hallucinations, algorithmic bias. We always need to signpost where that information is coming from. Some people still treat it like a search engine rather than something to actually develop a multimodal conversation with. As you and many others have talked about and shared, you know, prompt crafting is becoming more and more refined and nuanced in how we can make sure that we steer the conversation. I take the conversation of back in the 80s when I first played around with computer programming, and to date myself, that involved buying a magazine and typing it into my computer on a Saturday morning to make a ball bounce around the screen. But the general rule was garbage in, garbage out, and I think the same applies with AI. You know, that's the kind of the point. So all these things lead to it's refining, but it's not perfect. How do you cross that threshold to give schools confidence to look at how it could have an impact on workload and others? And I've seen some really good, but not for me, policies for schools on how to use AI in the classroom or the school policy. And honestly, they're 20 pages long. And I'm thinking, really? Is that accessible? Is it going to be used? Is that's more a manifestation of fear and risk aversion than it is about opportunity and engagement. So within our trust, we share something that I pulled together, and it's basically this is the approved apps that you can use as teachers to use within your practice. We have a policy that says don't upload student data. When you use the tools, if you create output of more than 2+ sentences, tag that this content was generated by in your lesson plan resources, the same way as if you copy something from a Google search, you post the reference to the article where you got it from. Where you capture something that works really well, share it, and this is where you share it. If you create some prompts that give you the output that you're looking for, share it. And most importantly, share what doesn't work well. And once we've built up confidence and we've got that community of feedback across all the teachers in our trust, then because you're confident using the tools, our next step will be to do the same process to how you could weave that into teaching and learning. So we're kind of encouraging and fostering the play with it within simple guardrails, without a phone book long list of rules and regulations, but in a safe way and a signposted way. And for me, that's about unlocking the potential for opportunity, but letting the people who use it decide for themselves how valuable that opportunity is or useful it is for what they're doing.
yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree with you more with trialing it, using it, just playing with it. Like that's the
Yeah.
way I first started. I was just playing with it, and people ask me like, "Oh," because in my school, I'm a lot of people know that I have an interest in it, so they come and ask me, and I'm just like, just don't pay for anything. Just try the free one. Try this one. Try Google. Try
Mm.
ChatGPT. Try whatever one you like. And see if it fits. And if you don't like it, then don't use it. That's okay. There's no pressure on it. It's like it's something that you need to be aware of, but not something that you actually need to. It's not the like you said. It's not the panacea. It's not the golden. It's not the silver bullet. It's
No.
not the the golden BB that gets
Yeah.
the
But
prize. So
but back to that EdTech conversation. I mean, one of the challenges is What do you choose? There's so many choices. And it's an ever changing. Every week there's fresh choices. So that becomes a barrier to adoption of anything, because we don't want to buy the shiny because the salesman said it was great. We don't want to buy this tool and be the very first user in the world to acquire this new tool. We don't like the idea, although it's healthy to do co-production, but we don't want to invest loads of our time helping a product reach a point where it's actually purposeful and useful. So we need to be also mindful about how do we actually evaluate technology, and that's a skill in itself. And I think sometimes you've got a two-part. You've got how do we evaluate before we commit to install, sign up and try, and then how do we evaluate impact post trying it? And understanding how you evaluate from a technical and a pedagogical perspective. Is this the right fit for us? Is it platform agnostic? Is it secure and is it stable? And at the same time, does it align with our curriculum? Have we already got something doing the same job? What else is happening in other schools, if appropriate, in our district or our cluster? That saves loads of time before you then try it. But then we know when it comes to tools like AI, our measure of impact could be quite different. What's your purpose? Are you using it to save time? Are you using it to differentiate resources? Are you using it purely as a quiz creation tool? Are you using it to actually provide something for your students to weave into extending their learning or the work that they're doing? And so I think we've got to be also reflect not just on how we make it easy for everyone to try a tool, but we also start the conversation about what does good look like? What are our measures? And they don't all have to be explicitly around, well, did the children get a better grade this year? Well, it's not all about that. I mean, it'd be great if that was the case, but it's much more nuanced than that. And it might be a case of, well, no, but actually some of your staff managed to finish work at 8 p.m. So that was a win because it was 9 p.m. before. There's one win, you know. Or it might be that we're actually creating resources where we've got some disengaged learners that are engaged for a different reason because we're finding different ways to use technology. So broadening that picture. And I guess the final bit I always say on that, and I can say it because I've got a fair few grey hairs now, is normally when we make strategic decisions in our schools, it's our leadership, our senior leadership team that will steer the project, the change, what we need to do against our school development plan or our self-evaluation framework. And when it comes to technology, sometimes they're not the best team because they don't always have the current lived experience. If we talk about the role of AI, well, in the truth, it's an ever-changing landscape, but even quite a lot of the technology we now rely on, it's only been in the classroom 5 years, 6 years, whatever. So sometimes when it comes to the effective use and creating a digital vision for your school or a digital strategy, whatever you want to call it, it takes confidence of leadership to actually delegate that down to middle leaders and teachers to be the ones that start that co-production. Now, senior leadership may dictate some of the priorities once you've got your digital vision. But naturally, if we sit around the table and say we've got 5 projects or priorities for this year as a leadership team, the one that relates to technology is probably the least comfortable one that they're going to be talking about. And that comfortable one tends to get pushed down the line because no one's really sure quite how we take it forward. So, I think the AI conversation empowers us to say, actually, there are no experts. Anyone who claims to be an expert in AI, well, I mean, you're out of date before you finish the sentence. So encouraging that sense of it's a level playing field and everybody's experiences and the things that work for them carry just as much weight is quite empowering, or it could be if it's used right. It can be quite empowering within the school.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what it comes down to: is it being used right?
Yeah.
And that's what it comes down to. Al, I thank you for your time. I've got a couple. We've delved into some amazing topics, which I'm thankful for. I love these conversations. I'm building. I'm learning more and more from every conversation.
You will have
And
some great people already. I can see on the curating, so it's a great start. Yeah.
yeah, and I love to hear from educators and people who are in education or who maybe just sort of also just outside of it. I mean, everyone's been involved in education. We've all gone to school, but it's just that conversation of hearing people's stories and hearing people's opinions and what worked and what hasn't worked, and I thank you for your time. And just to finish off this wonderful conversation, a couple of quick fun questions as we wrap it up. First one is, what's your favourite drink?
Oh, my favourite drink, this makes me sound very dated, is I love a glass of port. It's very much a Christmas time drink, but that
Yeah.
would be my favourite, would be a glass of port is when I kind of feel like it's a time of year where I know there's a bit of family time and a bit of relaxation on the horizon. I can smell the holiday season when I have a glass of port.
And you can't beat a good port.
I'm not sufficient aficionado to know the difference between a good or a bad port, but if it's the right colour and it tastes good, I'm in.
Then it's a good port.
Exactly.
Then it's a good port.
Yeah.
Now, you've been to a tremendous amount of countries in
Mm.
your travels. What what are some of the things that have that might make you go, yeah, I don't really want to go back there?
Well, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I'm very lucky to have been to a lot of countries, and I think you always have to go with a mindset of learning. Um, in many regards, I think it's say it quietly, really. It's more about infrastructure for me. I get more pleasure going to countries that are very culturally different to where I live because I feel there's more of a learning opportunity. And I have less aspiration to go to places to me that feel like there isn't really a sense of culture and community. So I think that really clumsily translates to I don't like just big Western cities. I'd much rather go to places where there's different perspectives on life and values and other things and learn from there. But I also say I can't think of anywhere that I wouldn't want to go back to because you always capture something from it. Maybe I could change the question to say, where would I like to have the rare opportunity to spend an extra day in and actually explore more than just be there to attend a conference or event or a school system?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I'm sure there's plenty of those cities, and it's a great like that question I asked, and so many people are like, oh, and
That's a
but
tough one.
most, and I would say the majority of the answer is, oh, it's not really one I wouldn't want to go to as such, but it's more about the people. It's more about, I didn't like, and as you said, infrastructure. It's like I didn't really like this part about it, but it was the experience of it. It challenged me, or the country was great, but I wasn't ready for it, or so
Yeah.
yeah, it's it's all about that, and that's what I love. Just throwing those little questions out there. Now, it wouldn't be the Tattoo Teacher podcast if I didn't ask, do you have any tattoos?
I have one tattoo on my chest. And the
Brilliant.
story is my daughter, who is now well grown up, decided in her late teenage years that she was going to get a tattoo. And she wanted a tattoo and she was desperate to have this one. But the deal was for a bit of fatherly support that I would go along and have the same tattoo. So we've got a matching tattoo. So I have a black and white moth tattooed on my chest. Probably wouldn't have been my first choice, but my daughter has a matching one, and she's subsequently gone on to have quite a range of tattoos and all sorts of little characters. I've not followed her on that journey. I think I did my fatherly duty at the first stage, but the truth of it is, I love the fact that we've got a matching tattoo on both of us. So
Oh,
yeah, just the one.
that's brilliant. And there's something I must say, there's something special between a father and a daughter. I've got two sons who I love. In you can't explain it, but there's just that special thing between the dad and the daughter. So, but lastly, but certainly not least, is if people want to hear or find out more about what you do, or get in contact with you, or follow you in your travels and your journeys, where can they go to find out about you?
Goodness. Well, I suppose if you want a grown-up mixed perspective on all the things I'm doing and work and sharing in newsletters, find me on LinkedIn. Not surprisingly, is Al Kingsley, and my Saturday newsletter is something where I share loads of other people's amazing stuff on a regular basis. So well worth a join. I do have an Instagram, not surprising, Al Kingsley, where you'll find more of me and my pooch doing fun things and out and about. And if you want to find out about books I read, articles I write, and other stuff, then I have a blog, which, not surprisingly, is alkingsley.com, where you can find kind of events and activities and other bits and pieces I'm involved in.
Well, I'll make sure I share those all in the show notes.
Bless you.
So, Al,
Been a pleasure, Phil. Thank you.
yes, well, the pleasure has been all mine. I want to thank you for your time, for your insights, for your answers, and just for being so open on the Tattoo Teacher podcast. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, sir.
Have a fantastic, I'm going to say, day.
Correct.
Thanks again, Al. I really appreciate it. Thank you for listening to the Tattoo Teacher podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and found it insightful. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, leave a review, and share with your network. Special thanks to DJ Fruit Salad for the music. You can find more of his work on Instagram at DJ Fruit Salad Official. Thanks again for listening, and I hope to see you in the next episode. Stay cool, be blessed.